What if I told you that 3 men walked out of the most secure prison in American history, and no one knows what happened to them next? No alarms, no gunshots, no bodies, just silence. This is not fiction. This is the Alcatraz Escape of 1962. Before we go deeper into this mystery, subscribe to the channel for real unsolved stories. Like this video to support the research, and comment what you think really happened. Alcatraz was designed to be impossible to escape. A cold, isolated rock in the middle of San Francisco Bay, surrounded by freezing water and powerful ocean currents. The temperature of the water could paralyze a human body within minutes. Prison officials believed no one could survive the swim, and that belief was enough to keep guards confident and inmates hopeless. But hope doesn't disappear easily. In January 1960, a prisoner arrived at Alcatraz who didn't see walls. He saw weaknesses. The prison placed him in a cell like every other inmate, never realizing that behind the sink was concrete weakened by years of saltwater erosion. The wall looked solid, but it wasn't. Night after night, using nothing more than a spoon, he began scraping the wall slowly, carefully, patiently. How long do you think it takes to carve a hole in a prison wall using a spoon without getting caught? Noise was the biggest danger. One wrong sound, and the plan would end forever. But every evening, during music hour, prisoners were allowed to play instruments. The sound of accordions and music echoed through the cell block, and behind that noise, the wall was being destroyed inch by inch. Guards walked past the cells every night, completely unaware that history was being rewritten just inches away from them. How many times do you think they stood there, unaware of what was happening? Eventually, the hole became large enough to crawl through. Behind it was an unused utility corridor, dark, dusty, and unguarded. That space became the center of everything. It was here that the real escape began to take shape. The men knew that getting out of the cell was only half the battle. The real enemy was the water. Cold, relentless, deadly. Swimming was not an option. The body would shut down within minutes, so they needed something else. Something that could float, something guards would never suspect. Over months, they collected dozens of discarded raincoats. They stitched them together by hand, sealing the seams using heat from prison pipes. Slowly, a raft began to form. Not a boat, not a miracle. Just enough to survive. Would you trust your life to something made in secret, from trash, inside a prison? But even the perfect escape plan has one final problem. Guards checked cells every night. If a prisoner didn't respond, alarms would sound instantly. The solution had to be flawless. Using soap, toilet paper, toothpaste, and stolen hair from the prison barbershop, they created fake heads. From a distance, under dim lighting, they looked real. Breathing, sleeping, alive. Night after night, they tested everything. Timing, silence, movement. One mistake meant death or life in solitary confinement. The question was, no longer can this work. The question was, will tonight be the night? Because once they left those cells, there would be no coming back. The night finally arrived on June 11th, 1962. The prison followed its usual routine. Lights dimmed. Guards completed their final head count. Everything looked normal. 3 men lay quietly in their beds, faces turned toward the wall, motionless under thin blankets. From a distance, nothing seemed unusual. Would you have noticed that the faces weren't breathing? After the lights went out, silence took over the cell block. Slowly, carefully, the men slid out of their beds. The fake heads stayed behind, perfectly placed. One by one, they squeezed through the holes behind the sinks, crawling into the narrow utility corridor that had hidden their secret for months. The walls had swallowed every trace of their plan, and now they were finally giving them back their freedom. They climbed up the vertical pipes, reaching the top of the cell block. Above them was a vent, small and rusted. It was torn open using stolen tools, just wide enough to pass through. Cold night air rushed in. For the first time in years, they were breathing air that didn't belong to a prison. How often does a human get that moment, the last breath before freedom or death? On the roof, they moved low, careful not to be seen by the guard tower. Every step had to be perfect. One slip, one shadow in the wrong place, and the alarms would scream. They reached the north side of the island, where guards rarely looked. There, hidden from view, the final stage of the plan began. The raft was inflated using a small concertina, the same instrument that once hid the sound of digging. The raincoat raft took shape slowly in the darkness, sealed by months of patience and desperation. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't strong. But it was hope. Would you trust your life to something built in silence and fear? At around 11:30 p.m., they pushed the raft into the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay. The water temperature was deadly. The currents were strong. This was the point of no return. They climbed onto the raft and disappeared into the darkness, aiming for Angel Island. The prison behind them remained silent, unaware that its greatest myth had just been challenged. Morning came. At 7 a.m., guards began the routine head count. Everything seemed normal until one head didn't move. A guard reached out and touched it. The head fell to the floor and shattered. Panic exploded across the island. Sirens blared. Boats were launched. Helicopters scanned the water. The entire bay was searched. How could 3 men vanish from a place designed to make vanishing impossible? Pieces of the raft were found floating in the water. A paddle fragment. Scraps of raincoat material. Officials quickly reached a conclusion. The men must have drowned. The cold water and strong currents were too much. The case was closed. Or was it? Because no bodies were ever found. And in a bay where bodies usually surface within days, this silence was disturbing. Could they have survived? Could the currents have carried them to safety instead of death? If they drowned, where were they? The prison shut down the case, but the questions refused to die. The search continued for days. Boats cut through the bay, helicopters scanned the water, and divers searched the depths near Alcatraz. Officials expected bodies to surface, because that was what usually happened in San Francisco Bay. But days passed, then weeks, and still nothing. No bodies, no remains, just water and unanswered questions. If they drowned, why didn't the bay give them back? The FBI took over the case and began a detailed investigation. They studied the tides, the currents, the temperature of the water, and the timing of the escape. Their early conclusion leaned toward death by drowning. The water was too cold, they said. The currents too strong. Survival was nearly impossible. But nearly impossible is not the same as impossible, is it? Something strange began to bother investigators. The direction of the currents on that night suggested something unexpected. Instead of pulling objects out into the open ocean, the water may have pushed them toward land, toward Angel Island. If that happened, the escape plan wasn't suicidal. It was precise. So why did officials rush to close the case? Then came the clues. Months after the escape, a blue raincoat fragment was found floating in the bay. Officials claimed it was part of the raft. Case closed, they said. But no fingerprints. No proof. Just an assumption. Later, a wallet reportedly belonging to one of the men was found near the shoreline. Still no body. Still no confirmation. Would you declare someone dead based on fragments and guesses? Years passed, and the trail grew colder. But it never vanished. Family members of the Anglin brothers received Christmas cards signed with their names. Their mother received flowers anonymously every year, long after the escape. No return address. No explanation. Just silence. Who sends flowers to a dead woman's grave every year without being seen? Then there were sightings. Reports came in from Brazil. Men who looked identical. Men who spoke English with familiar accents. In one photograph taken years later, 2 men stood together on a farm in South America. Former officials analyzed the image and said it could be them. Could. Not certain. But not impossible either. How many coincidences can exist before they stop being coincidences? In 1979, after 17 years of investigation, the FBI officially closed the case. Their final conclusion stated that the men drowned in the bay. No bodies were recovered. But the file was sealed anyway. Why close a case that never had physical proof of death? Decades later, the U.S. Marshals reopened the investigation. New experts studied the raft design, wind patterns, and survival possibilities using modern science. Their conclusion shocked many people. The escape was survivable. Difficult, but possible. The bay did not guarantee death. It only promised risk. And these men had already risked everything. Then, in 2013, a letter surfaced, allegedly written by one of the escapees. It claimed survival. It claimed illness. It claimed regret. Handwriting analysis was inconclusive. Authenticity was uncertain. But the letter raised the same question that never went away. Why does this case refuse to stay buried? Alcatraz closed as a prison in 1963, just 1 year after the escape. Today, it stands as a museum. Tourists walk through the same cells, staring at the same walls, hearing the same story. Officials still say no one ever escaped alive, but deep down, even they hesitate. Because the truth is simple and terrifying. 3 men walked out of their cells. They entered the water, and after that, history lost them. So tell me, if they died, why was there never a body? And if they lived, where did they go? Years passed, but the case refused to die. Every few years, new experts re-examined the escape, and every time, the same uncomfortable truth returned. The plan was not reckless. It was calculated. The timing matched the tides. The raft design was crude but functional. The escape was dangerous, but not impossible. So why was the word impossible used so confidently? One theory says they drowned silently, pulled under by cold shock and exhaustion. That explanation sounds logical, but logic demands evidence. Where were the bodies? Where were the bones? San Francisco Bay has returned bodies in other cases, sometimes within days. Why was this case different? Can an entire ocean hide 3 men forever without leaving a single trace? Another theory says they reached Angel Island, dried their clothes, and disappeared into the night. No cameras, no DNA tracking, no digital footprints. This was 1962, a time when changing your identity didn't require hacking databases, only distance and silence. If they survived that first hour in the water, what could have stopped them after that? There is also the possibility that only some survived. Could one have drowned while the others escaped? Could fear, fatigue, or injury have separated them in the darkness? And if that happened, would the survivors ever speak, knowing that silence was the only thing protecting their freedom? The government still officially lists the escape as a failure. The men are presumed dead, but the investigation remains open, not because of hope, but because of doubt. Doubt exists only when certainty fails. And certainty failed here. Today, Alcatraz stands quiet. Tourists walk through the same cell block, staring at the damaged concrete behind the sinks. Guides say no one escaped alive. Yet they pause, just for a second, because deep down, even they know this story never truly ended. 3 men challenged a system built on fear. They planned in silence. They disappeared into the dark. And the world was left with questions instead of... So now the question comes to you. Did they drown in the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay? Or did they become ghosts, free, invisible, and forgotten by history? What do you believe? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video. Subscribe for more real-life mysteries that history couldn't explain. Comment your theory below. Did they survive or not? And share this story with someone who loves unsolved cases. Because some prisons lock the body, but some minds were never meant to stay inside.